And here's a map of where Ukraine is seeing a lot of this action. Russian troops pushing in from three sides, much like my prom night. The Ukrainians pushing right back at every turn. This is a fast-moving story, so we've got a special panel of foreign policy and military experts to discuss it, kicking things off. Let's start with KTTH Seattle radio host and U.S. Bosnia conflict Army veteran Brian Suits. He's joined by the director of the Libertarian Institute and Antiwar.com, where he serves as editorial director, Scott Horton, and retired Navy SEAL senior chief and Wisconsin Republican congressional candidate Derek Van Orden. Welcome to you all, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Suits, I will start with you. Let's talk about what we're seeing in Ukraine from civilians there. Is it a good idea for the president to tell people to take up arms against one of the most powerful militaries on earth? And are you surprised by the results?
It is a good thing because they're equipped now with a remarkably simple to use single shot anti-armor weapon that's shown itself in the last 5 days to be astoundingly effective. And as it turns out, they're not one of the most powerful conventional militaries on the face of the earth, or else they would be in Kiev drinking vodka out of Zelensky's skull, like they promised. So this is what happens when a nation is threatened with extinction. It's people, it's men and women take up arms, and if, in this case, the world's most sophisticated single-shot missile. So, of course, this is what you do. This is astounding that we're living through this history, that a comedian is standing up to the time, to meeting his moment, as Governor French Laundry says. But it's an extraordinary example of courage in the form of this 5'6" comedian dude.
Well, he is inspiring people, Scott, and I want to talk about that because, you know, obviously I share your hope that the U.S. does not become involved in this conflict and that there are not U.S. troops who die for this cause, but I am astounded at the bravery of these people. However, you said on this show and on my podcast, not once, but twice, that Russia was not going to invade Ukraine. How did you get that wrong?
I do owe you an apology for that, although I did say I can't read the future, and I don't know for sure. I'm not so much in the business of predictions as much as telling you what I know to be true. But I did not think he would resign, and partially that's because our current CIA director, William Burns, back when he worked as ambassador to Russia in 2008, warned specifically in WikiLeaks. You can find it thanks to Julian Assange. You can find the WikiLeaks from 2008. Niet means niet, where he explains very clearly Russia's objections to Bush's plans and Condoleezza Rice's plans to promise NATO membership to Ukraine and Georgia. And Antony Blinken, for all his failings, is said to be, you know, very well schooled in Russia affairs. And I thought that these men would essentially advise Biden on a path to negotiate a peaceful resolution to this crisis. And the reality is, before the war at least, the demands that Putin was making were essentially reasonable, that America seek to have the Kiev government implement the Minsk II peace deal of 2015, which our allies, the French and the Germans, signed, that we would rejoin the INF Treaty, the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty that kept mid-range nukes out of Europe for 30 years, that Donald Trump tore up just 2 years ago, and that we would essentially adopt a policy of neutrality, and that Ukraine would adopt a policy of neutrality instead of running off with the West and joining under into the American so-called security umbrella. In the Cold War, Austria was considered neutral between the East and the Western blocs. Now we're 3-4 countries east of there, talking about handing out war guarantees to countries directly on Russia's border. And the thing is about it, with the morality play of good versus evil, and clearly Russia's aggression here, which is unwarranted, the thing is, you cannot deny that America provoked this. And the reason why is because Brent Scowcroft and Robert McNamara and George Kennan and Robert Nitze and all of the wisest so-called graybeards of the American foreign policy establishment warned that this would happen 30 years ago and for 30 years since. You could listen to John J. Mearsheimer, the dean of the realist school of foreign policy in America, from the University of Chicago tell you the very same thing. It's America's policy which has provoked this conflict. We should have figured out a way to back down, send, if Antony Blinken's not up to the job, send somebody who is up to the job over there to negotiate a peaceful resolution. And no, it's wrong that we should be sending in arms and encouraging the Ukrainians to continue to fight. They are sorely overmatched. We should be focusing on a negotiated end to this war immediately.
So let's talk about that. I don't know that I trust anyone in the president's orbit to go over there and peacefully resolve this. Sorry to say, I would love to have the kind of faith in my president that they do in Ukraine. And of course, I wish our country the best. Unfortunately, Derek, we're dealing with a sociopath who is melting down and also has a pretty robust arsenal of nuclear weapons. What is most concerning here for you, Derek?
Well, let's be very, very clear. The only person that's responsible for the invasion of Ukraine is Vladimir Putin, but he was emboldened by President Biden abandoning American citizens to their fate to terrorists in Afghanistan. The most dangerous thing that we can do right now is listen to these chicken hawks that are flying around Washington, D.C., demanding that we put in a no-fly zone. It's a horrible idea. If you have NATO aircraft, the United States Air Force, flying and shooting down Russian aircraft, that's an act of war. Yes. Hillary Clinton went on some television show and said that we should be doing cyber warfare against Russia. That is a horrible idea. We need to right now hold what we got, stick to what's on paper. Vladimir Putin needs to absolutely understand unequivocally, black and white, that if he invades a NATO country, we will enact Article 5 of our treaty. That's it. So I have no issue with supplying the Ukrainians with weapons to defend themselves. I think that's the right thing to do. But again, Vladimir Putin is responsible for this. He was emboldened by Joe Biden's weakness in Afghanistan. And let's not forget, Xi is now watching Putin.
Absolutely. I have one question for all three of you. I want you to keep your answers as short as possible. Should Ukraine be welcomed into NATO, Brian?
No, we knew this 20 years ago. They're a basket case. They may get better, but it'll take a generation of sending guys to West Point, like the men that I was in field artillery basic course with. But no, they're brave, and I admire them and the whole thing. But they have territorial disputes, and that excludes them automatically.
Scott?
I agree with everything that he just said, and I admire the people of Ukraine very much. And but it's just, there's no way in the world we should have ever expanded NATO up to Russia's border in this way, into far Eastern Europe, in what they rightly consider their security zone and sphere of interest.
Derek?
I think that this invasion may make that question moot right now. So I cannot give you an accurate answer, and I'm not going to speculate.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. We'll see you a little bit later in the show. The Ukraine War Man panel returns. More breaking news out of Ukraine. Satellite imaging company Maxar reporting the Russian military convoy heading to Kyiv. Now 40 miles long. How do you do that? Is there a mile in between each tank? And the invasion now putting Vladimir Putin's mental state in the spotlight, especially after threatening the world with nuclear Armageddon. Former U.S. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice has met with Putin many times and now says his behavior is erratic. Watch.
He was always calculating and cold, but this is different. He seems erratic. There is an ever-deepening delusional rendering of history.
So is Putin losing his mind, or does he know exactly what he's doing? Our special foreign policy military panel is back, and it's a man panel. Brian Suits, Scott Horton, Derek Van Orden. They're not related. Their names aren't even spelled similarly. All right, so Suits, I will start with you. Has Putin lost his mind, or does he know exactly what he's doing?
No, he is vexed because he was assured that the Red Army was mighty and they would achieve their first day goals. And he would, like I say, he would be in Kiev by now doing a dance-off with Zelensky. They have not, because they're not the army that he was told they were. And he's always in control. Currently, he's not in control because the B team that are still waiting in Russia, they're the conscripts. And they don't do 24-month service anymore. They do 12-month. You don't want these guys behind a gun. It's like taking a McDonald's employee on day 2 and saying, hey, invade Ukraine. So you can tell this is a guy who's been in control since he was, a major in the KGB. And now he's not in control because people he was supposed to trust have lied to him about his own capabilities, and he's being humiliated. He's being pantsed on the world stage. Yeah. And she, who used to think he was a peer, now realizes that he's balloon juice.
Okay, I love balloon juice. It's delicious. So, Scott, is it rich for you hearing Condoleezza Rice describe Vladimir Putin in this way? And Emmanuel Macron has echoed her sentiment, as have other world leaders. Is this a talking point, or has he really gone nuts?
It's a thin excuse. Condoleezza Rice is the one who tore up the anti-ballistic missile treaty and put dual-use missile launchers in Poland that can launch Tomahawk missiles tipped with H-bombs. And she's the one who brought the Baltic states right on Russia's border into NATO and promised to bring Ukraine and Georgia into NATO. This is all her fault while she was working for George W. Bush. What's she going to do, take responsibility? Of course she says it's because of his mental illness. Oh, something, you know what it was? He woke up on the wrong side of the bed this morning. And, as far as, I don't know who claimed this. The Washington Post said that Putin was promised that he'd win the war in a day. Putin said back in 2014 to an Italian diplomat, I could be in Kiev in 2 weeks. That was his threat. Now he's a fool who believed he'd win a war in a day. It took America 2 weeks, 3 weeks to sack Baghdad in 2003. We lost that war to the insurgency later on. But for Russia to be able to defeat Ukraine's state army is not in doubt. They have a 400,000-man army. The reality is that NATO expansion is the root of all evil here. Pat Buchanan and Ron Paul were right. We should have abolished NATO 30 years ago.
I want to bring Derek in. Your thoughts, Derek?
I think that something's going on with him personally because he gravely miscalculated what's going on. I told you on the show that the math does not add up for him to invade Ukraine, and we're seeing that come to fruition right now. It was a ludicrous mistake. But here's what Vladimir Putin needs to understand, that he is not the only Russian that can de-escalate this conflict. And the farther he walks down the road towards a nuclear war, I think that he needs to be very cautious, not just from NATO, but from his own people.
Can he be stopped by his generals if he does, in fact, go forward with a nuclear event?
Well, I'm not sure what the nuclear launch procedures are for the Russian army, but I'm assuming that there are several steps that would need to take place and that they would stop him, that better and cooler heads would prevail.
All right, Brian, Scott, and Derek, fantastic job tonight. Thank you for bringing it all home. I appreciate all of you. Thank you.